to give a shout out to my old directing professor, Bill Hopkins, just to your point, Ash, who said one time, he's like, your biggest creative decision making will always be the people you choose to work with.
I've talked a lot about the cast of Dimension 20, and deservedly so, I think. But you know who I have been unjustifiably silent about? The incredible people behind the scenes who actually make the show in all its artistic, technological, and logistical glory. So today, that is who we're going to talk about. Because without them, D20 would look like this. It literally wouldn't exist. It can't exist without them. And even if it could, we wouldn't get incredible things like this.
Oh, wow!
Or this.
Here we go.
Or this.
Wow! Oh my goodness!
Now, there are a lot of people who have worked on Dimension 20. From artists to editors to producers to actors and directors and technicians and many, many more. So I'm not going to be able to talk about everyone individually. It's just not possible. So what I did was I watched every crew edition of Adventuring Party, behind the scenes featurettes, I watched interviews with the folks who work on the show, and I tried to reverse engineer the process by which the show is made. And what I want to do is highlight the people who either appear in the sources or are often mentioned in those sources. So I'm doing my best, but I will inevitably miss people, so post in the comments folks who you think deserve more appreciation and recognition. So let's go over how exactly production happens, and not just Dimension 20, but film and video production in general. I have a diploma in that, so I should know a little bit about what I'm talking about. When you're bringing a project to life, there are 3 general stages that it advances through: pre-production, production, and post-production. Basically, planning, shooting, and editing. Each of these stages has a lot more to it than that, but from a layman's perspective, that should give you a solid idea of what is happening during each of these stages. And of course, after that, there's release and marketing and distribution, which are important, but it's not what I'm going to be touching on today in this video. Each stage has different people involved. Many people are involved in multiple or all stages, while some just participate in one. For example, an editor is typically only really involved in post-production, but in some situations may be involved in pre-production depending on how important their perspective is to the show. Whereas producers are involved from beginning to end. So let's go through each of these stages and talk about the different roles and who at D20 fills them. So first off, in pre-production, you start with a story, which sounds like it starts with whoever is GMing that season, but they're not the only ones who have any say. There are a number of people who contribute to how a story develops, and that includes the head of series, the creative director, all of the narrative and cultural consultants that they hire, and of course, creative producers. Rick Perry is someone that probably deserves his own video, but also Dropout made a whole documentary about him, which is better than anything I could make, so definitely go watch that. We're still gonna cover him and the art team just a little bit later. All of these folks play important roles in shaping the story. The GM appears to usually be the center, but like in the case of Misfits and Magic, they are sometimes co-written by the GM and someone else. In that case, it was Abria and Orion D. Black, who was the creative director at the time. And clearly that approach works, because Misfits and Magic is one of my favorite seasons. The narrative and cultural consultants also play a key role. Traditionally, narrative consultants take a look at a story and they help refine it to make it as engaging and effective as possible. Cultural consultants typically educate the creators on whatever culture is being represented or explored. They don't discuss these roles much in the BTS videos that I watched, so I'm not 100% sure this is how they operate on D20, but this is my understanding of how those roles work. And from my limited perspective, they seem to be doing a pretty good job, since, I never really see too many complaints on this front, but I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments. But their involvement doesn't actually stop in pre-production. In many cases, all of these roles continue to advise throughout the entirety of the production process. The famous Stacy fake name twist in Mentopolis, according to Brennan, was a Carlos Luna pitch. And in more recent seasons, Carlos Luna has been the head of series. And to be honest, I didn't really know what that meant until I saw Carlos himself explain it in a TikTok.
I make sure Dimension 20 keeps Dimension 20ing, if that makes sense. I work in development of each season, pre-production, production, post, to make sure Dimension 20 both stays and grows as Dimension 20. I know that's a weird way to describe it. Traditionally, on most shows, there is a showrunner who's in charge of lead creative. But at Dimension 20, everyone has a big hand in the creative. So that means Brennan, Rick Perry, Michael Shawbuck, myself, as well as the teams that work under these creatives. Dimension 20 is not one person, it is a team of a bunch of people. And with a team with so many creatives on it, there needs to be one through line. And that's where I come in. I have a background in a bunch of different types of creatives, so I can speak up for the people that aren't in the development phase, but might be in the post-production phase, or the people that are in the pre-production phase, but they're not in the marketing phase. Does that make sense? I am in every single part of the process.
So Carlos serves as a kind of creative through line, making sure someone is there, keeping the project creatively focused on its tone, on its genre, that kind of thing. Making sure it stays consistent throughout, which I think is really, really valuable. It's an almost invisible job that requires a lot of different skills, so shout out to Carlos Luna, D20's Swiss Army knife. Once the story has been developed, they have to start planning production. And this is where producers come in. And I can tell you from personal experience that a good producer is a godsend for everyone on the team. A good producer is the difference between a smooth production and an absolute nightmare. Producers do a lot of things, like scheduling, hiring, managing. They're the people who are on the phone all day, coordinating dozens of people, places, and things to make sure everything happens and happens on time.
But as a producer, my job is to foster and facilitate that camaraderie around the table, and also get people to do their homework and answer emails. And so my challenge is always walking that tightrope between like building a really like comfortable world and also setting boundaries and creating structure.
They're the people who solve problems. They're the badasses who see an issue and rush to solve it before it affects anyone on the team. They take on stress so no one else has to. The producers that are mentioned and appear on adventuring parties most often are Ebony Harden, David Kearns, and Ash Minnick. So huge shout out to them for all of their incredible work, but IMDb also lists a lot of other folks, so shout out to them as well. Fun fact, according to the Fantasy High BTS video, Sam Reich was the one who came up with the idea that D20 takes place inside of a polyhedral dome, which is one of the most iconic things about Dimension 20, so thanks, Sam. Sam really has been
here the whole time.
Now the production team, they are the ones who build the set, plan the lighting and camera setups. They handle technical aspects of the special effects. They need to make sure all of their equipment works. They need to make adjustments to the set to accommodate story elements for each different campaign. And they need to find ways to do new things to make the show better. And speaking of making things better, you can use this video's sponsor, Describe, to make your home games better. And I know no one likes ads, but just bear with me because Describe is worth it. If you haven't heard about it yet, Describe is a fantastic Annie-winning service used to help game masters enhance their campaigns. They have a huge library of pre-written text you can read aloud to your players, fully described battle maps and film quality ambiances, sound effects, and music through their latest edition, Opus, which is a modern web app that can stream layered audio to your players. I recently used Describe and Opus to enhance a sci-fi one-shot I ran, and no joke, all my players wanted to know where I was getting my music and sound effects from. The maps were gorgeous and the descriptions helped me come up with a story, but they weren't so restrictive that I couldn't improvise. Honestly, Describe made GMing so much easier than it normally is. And the best part is that Describe is free to try. And if you use the code CastleCaster, you can get an extended 1-month free trial. That's code CastleCaster for an extended 1-month free trial. Thank you to Describe, and now back to the video. For example, projections. In a previous video, I attributed their inception to Aabria Iyengar, but it turns out that wasn't entirely true. It was born from a stylistic decision that she made, but the actual inception and integration was born from multiple people experimenting and trying to figure out how to make that decision happen.
The whole reason projections ever started to exist was Aabria wanted to try snow. And we were literally having a discussion about having PAs reach into buckets and throw snow over the walls for an hour and a half straight. And
I remember that now. I just said,
and of course, everyone is thinking it. Everyone's thinking like, that's not possible. And it was actually our producer at the time, Ash, who suggested, oh, I have these like Home Depot, like $20 little projectors that you put in your front lawn and you aim it at like the side of your house and it makes little snowflakes. And I think during that Zoom call, I literally said, that is absolutely not going to work. And defiantly, she brought it anyways and set it up and and she's shown it into the back of the walls. And from the back, it looked, I couldn't see anything, but then I walked around to the other side and just because of the type of material and the way that the light is hitting it, I was like, it showed up perfectly. And it was from that idea that I started to go really, really deep. And I was like, okay, this is a sign that let's jump into projectors. Let's buy a couple. Let's do the math. Let's do the research. Let's figure out how can we now escalate this creatively and make this a big thing.
This story just goes to show how collaborative any production is. It's really easy for me to see something new happen at the same time as a new person appears on the show and assume the two are connected. And Aabria Iyengar definitely has had a huge stylistic effect on D20, but in that video, I attributed the results of that influence entirely to her when I should have spread that praise to the entire production team, which goes for a lot of the things I said in that video. I don't want to take away from Aabria's contributions. I just want to recognize that there were a whole team of other extremely talented folks influencing how the show evolved as well. Because the way D20 seems to work, regardless of who has the idea originally, when one shows up, everyone who can will build on it to make it as good as possible.
Every time that I had an idea or came up with something that was good, and everybody came together and made it impossibly awesome. Not even just better, just it's I have an idea for a thing, and then everyone just did their best work and it just elevated the whole show.
Which is kind of the heart of what not just Dimension 20, but Dropout as a whole is about. It's all about improv. One of the core rules of improv is yes and. Everyone who works on the show seems to always be building on each other's ideas, which is I think one of the reasons Dimension 20 is so good. Another is they're also just really good at their jobs, which brings us to the art team. Because few people are as good at their jobs as them. The art team is led by fashion icon Rick Perry. Aside from the cast, Rick Perry is probably the most recognized person who works on Dimension 20. He got his own documentary, for crying out loud. And it's genuinely great. I highly recommend you watch it. So I'm not going to spend too much time on him because frankly, there's not much I can add. I can only really repeat what everyone already knows. He's incredible. The work is plain as day. You see it every episode. Everyone knows how great he and his team are. He, Raven Bartlett, Jesse Heron, Cameron Chimera, Ty Grayson do work that is integral to Dimension 20 as any one of the Intrepid heroes. When I think of Dimension 20, the minis and the sets are some of the first things that come to mind. Ebony Harden even talks about how getting the minis shipped in is like Christmas morning.
I feel like art is really like Christmas for all of us. It's like when that to me, if we did have to say a hard line, when are we actually in production? It's when things start to come from Lopez Island and are shipped down to LA, and then we get to see them. Because this is all we're seeing renderings, we're on Zoom, we're on Slack, we're seeing stills, but then these big crates arrive, and it's okay, the crates are coming, and then just so amazing to see them. It's very dramatic.
So I want to sing the praises of some of the other people and processes that don't get as much attention. For example, character artists. There are a ton of different people who draw the beautiful art that we see when we're introduced to a new character, and not one of them ever misses. Every piece of art, every illustration, every character design is on point and even elevates the character that's being created. And there are so many of them, in no world could I actually name them all, but I will do my best to credit as many of y'all as possible in this next section. Now, I am not an artist, so I cannot go into specifics about why I like this art. I can't analyze technique or proportions or scale or anything like that. That is beyond my skill set. But I can tell you how it makes me feel and how I think it contributes to the show. What I love about the art on Dimension 20 is how much it captures the energy and the tone of whatever season it appears in. All of the artists are fantastic at developing or adapting to a visual style that perfectly meshes with what we're seeing on screen. The Starstruck art matches the wacky screwball style of comedy that the season is known for. A Crown of Candy art is wildly creative in its use of food, and Never After art really captures that old school storybook vibe. On top of the art amplifying the tone of the season, they also perfectly capture and elevate the personalities of the characters they portray. For example, take a look at the art for the first season of Fantasy High. Each of the portraits perfectly represent each of the bad kids. You see this art and you know exactly who each of them are, even if you haven't seen the show, as well as the tropes they're trying to emulate. From their expressions to their body language to their outfits, it's all so expertly done. And something else that artists do on the show, besides the characters, is the intros. The intros to every season are so good, they're really great at setting the scene and mentally preparing you for the episodes to come. Not to mention all the projections. Look at these things, they're beautiful. They add so much to every shot they're in without being too distracting from the actual show. unless that's the point. They elevate the tone, environments, and even the jokes. They haven't been there since the beginning, but they have absolutely become a staple of Dimension 20. All of these things, the characters, the maps, the intros, the projections, have to be drawn by hands that are presumably attached to people. So shout out to all the Dimension 20 artists out there. You are doing incredible work, and you're adding so much to the show that we love. Moving on to the actual production itself. The people that are on set, managing and using all the equipment, physically building the sets and making sure that they get the shot and that all the technology is running as expected, y'all are lifesavers. Folks who work in this part of the film industry are equal parts artist and technician. They use their intricate knowledge of both art and technology to capture the story and performances that are happening in front of them. Now, you might think that Dimension 20 is a pretty simple shoot. The players sit down on the dome, you point a couple cameras at the cast, and you hit record and go from there. Wrong. You'd be wrong. Even at the beginning, Dimension 20 was never a simple shoot. Sure, you don't have to worry too much about the camera angles, pans, tilts, or zooms yet, but setting up a continuous shot where the lighting changes and the cast is unpredictable and making sure it looks good at all times while coordinating with at least 7 audio sources, probably with backups, and making sure that sounds good and all of this stays running for 2 or more hours without anything failing takes a tremendous amount of technical knowledge and coordination. On a normal movie or TV shoot, there's typically only one camera. For certain shots, they might use more if they want to capture multiple angles, but generally, one is running at a time. They might have a couple audio sources, but there's usually one main one, and they typically only shoot for, at most, a couple minutes at a time. Again, there are exceptions to all of these depending on the shot and the story, but there are actually fewer moving parts in a shoot like this, not accounting for massive special effects. And I'm not trying to discount the work that movie and TV crews do. They're great as well and have different challenges that this crew doesn't have to deal with. I'm just trying to illustrate the specific challenges of shooting a show like Dimension 20 and how much there is to coordinate, as well as how much work that takes. And that's just camera, lighting, and sound. Someone had to build that table that they will not let Abria cut a hole in. Making the shoot happen is a ton of work that is both mentally and physically demanding. There's so many moving parts that anything can and will go wrong. Maybe a piece of equipment falls, maybe a vital cast or crew member gets sick or injured, or maybe the fire marshal shuts down your shoot and you end up in a warehouse at 3 a.m.
It's 3 a.m. in a warehouse.
So the fact that the show happens at all, let alone how often and how well it goes, is a testament to the crew's skill and preparedness. There are tons of people who work in this department, from camera operators and assistants, to grips and gaffers, to electricians and lighting designers. I simply don't have time to list all of your names, but here's the list of credits from IMDb. You are all incredible and know that the fans of this show are extremely appreciative of what you do. But of course, production does not stop there, because after the main shoot, they do a mini shoot, where they go through each episode and shoot inserts of the minis to 1, show off how awesome they are, and 2, make the battles more visually dynamic. I loved whenever the players describe their character doing something cool or funny, and we cut to a representation of that action with the minis playing it out. It's such a fun and unique part of the show that I think needs some more recognition. This is actually where the Dimension 20 shoot actually becomes a little more traditional. It's single camera, but without an audio source or actors, just filming the minis being moved around. But this presents its own challenges. For example, filming tiny things is actually really hard. I'll let DOP Kevin Stiller explain it.
I would say that the part of the shoot that is the most challenging and most fun for me is the mini shoot. It is by far and most, not only some of the most challenging stuff that I shoot for D20 in its entirety, but I think like in my actual full career shooting many different styles of content, when you're filming on a macro scale, it requires a level of finesse that is incredibly challenging because, we're trying to do shots that we're jibbing up and down, we're dollying left and right. Sometimes we're gonna push in, have the camera jib up, look down. Doing that on a macro scale, literally just your heart beating will actually translate into the shot. That the heart beating of my hand, just by the way I'm holding the jib, can ever so slightly vibrate it enough that could ruin a take.
They could have simply locked off the camera, moved the minis around, and called it a day. But of course, they went above and beyond, and actually get creative with the camera work on a bunch of miniatures. And to do this, they had to basically invent their own camera rig.
When I first came into D20, so minis had already been shot,
I was not the first to ever do minis for D20. That was, unfortunately, I don't know the name of the first ever DP. But then after that DP was Santiago Bati, who also shoots Play It By Ear. And Santi came up with the idea of using this Osmo camera. So it was like a consumer level DJI Osmo that he made some custom cables for. And we were able to rig that in a crazy way to some pipes, to a tripod head, to a camera slider. And that allowed that freedom of like, let's get in there and capture the minis.
Not to mention they have to track the combats, which, depending on the season, there might be as many as 10 of them. The combats are often multiple hours long, so they have to mark down the things they want to shoot, then set up the battle maps as they appeared in that moment, and then shoot them. Many of these shots require alterations to the minis as well, so the artists are involved. I feel like basically any other production would scrap this idea of the mini shoot because they don't see the value. They'd see the amount of resources that would have to be invested and decide that it isn't worth the effort. I mean, they already have a great looking set with charismatic performers telling compelling stories. I don't think this aspect would be seen as necessary to most productions, but Dimension 20 does it, and I think it's a vital part of the show, so thanks. Now let's talk about direction. On a normal movie, the director is the one with the vision, the person who plans the shots, directs the actors, and generally is in charge of coordinating all the artists and technicians around them to bring the story that's in their head to life. But that's not really how Dimension 20 works, at least not from an outsider's perspective. The storytelling is being done in such a different format. Is a director necessary? Well, yes, and that's where Michael Shabak comes in. Michael Shabak is described several times as the beating heart of Dimension 20.
Michael, our director, wasn't able to be with us for some of the episodes because he was very sick. So that was also like, Michael's really the heartbeat of D20, and so it was like scary for me to not do a season with him in the room.
Shabak does such a good job of being like a coach and a leader that in that moment, it almost felt like we wanted to do that for him. And just his energy of getting us to that point is, I don't know, it was that ember that was able to make it so the shoot ran as flawlessly as it did.
Everyone seems to have a really high opinion of this guy. So what exactly is it that he does? Well, for the mini shoot, it's obvious. He directs that pretty traditionally, choosing the moments he wants to recreate, picking the shots and camera angles, and he does that really well. But according to him, this is his primary role.
I liken Unscripted, and especially Dimension 20 as a director, to being sort of the party host and also the vanquisher of bad vibes, right? Like it's all about the vibes on Dimension 20. And if they're feeling, if the cast is feeling anything from the set, drama or whatever, it leaks into the dome, and it would change the show. What we're doing here at Dimension 20 is we're doing what I call the television show, making the television show the ride. So you come in like you're coming into Disney or Universal Studios. I'm going to give you the best making the television show experience possible. Every single person, that's not just talent, every single person that comes in and is a part of our show and a part of our family, you get treated with mutual respect. We work really, really hard, and we love what we do, and everybody goes home feeling good about what they did.
Michael Shabak is the guy who makes it his first priority to make sure everyone involved in the project feels not just good, but comfortable, confident, and like they belong there. And to be honest, listening to him talk about Dimension 20 got me a little teary-eyed.
We must make every season better than the last season because, and here's why, the secret behind all of Dimension 20 and why so much of my heart and soul is in it, is that there are people out in the world that are lost. They are alone in the world. They do not belong, or they do not feel they belong anywhere where they currently are physically. And they tune into Dimension 20 and they go, that's my people. That's my home. That's where I belong. And you do belong here. So the better we make this show, the more people are going to see it, and the more people we can find that are lost and say, you're not lost. You're found, and you're found right here with us, and this is where you belong. And look on camera, it's people just like you.
He clearly loves making this show and is passionate about making it as good as it can be. Not just for the fans, but for the cast and crew as well. He wants everyone to do their best and have an incredible time doing it. He deeply cares about collaboration. He knows he's surrounded by talented people and he believes in them. He's not one of those directors that's so deeply attached to his vision that he forces his crew to obey every whim. He wants to know what the people around him think, and he's always able to get the best from everyone he works with because of the atmosphere he creates. The positivity, the creativity, the comfort, the trust. I think D20 wouldn't be what it is without him. But I can also say that about everyone who's ever been a part of the show. But I think it's especially true for Michael Schaubach, because something that is at D20's heart is something that he clearly makes a conscious effort to achieve. Thank you, Michael Schaubach. Now that we're all emotional, let's move on to post-production. Post is where a lot of the magic happens. Up until this point, a show does not exist. All they have are a bunch of video and audio files that need to be put together, which I can tell you from experience is a tedious, frustrating process. It can be a lot of fun, but mostly it's long and tedious. That said, it is a vital part of the process. Not just that has to get done, but it has to get done well, especially for comedy. An edit can make a joke soar or fall on its face. Comedy and editing are all about timing. Where do you make the cut? Where do you let a moment breathe, or do you end that moment more abruptly? When does the music come in? What kind of genre of music works best? And what sound effects do you use, and where exactly do you place them? Let's take a look at a moment from Fantasy High freshman year and examine the editing.
You see that your father, the elven diplomat from Falinel, reads the paper and ruffles it. Your mother, a professor at Hudall.
Pay attention to the cuts here. The editors are the people making the choices to cut from Brennan describing the scene to the character art, then adding Siobhan's name as well as her character's name, punching in on her face to capture the frustrated expression.
I'm Adine Abinant. I'm the daughter of the Elvish ambassador. I was at Hudol, but unfortunately I failed the entrance exam to get into the upper school.
They're also the ones that decided when the music starts and ends. We have this high-class classical sound to emphasize Adine's family's vibe, and then it ends right as Siobhan gets into a more serious part of her character's story, as not to undercut it with silly music. The editors are taking in a lot of information and condensing it into a single stream. They're taking a look at all of the camera angles, which in this case is 3, and keeping an eye out for the moments that are interesting and important to put on screen. They also have a large library of music and sound effects, as well as a bunch of amazing art and videos from the mini shoots to work with. What ends up on screen is a fraction of the stuff they produce. Not in the sense that any story elements or art are cut, just that each season probably produces hundreds, if not thousands of gigabytes of data, and each episode is condensed down to a fraction of that. This is a lot of work and very time-consuming work. It's not something that's readily apparent when you're watching the show, because the editing feels very intuitive. Of course, that's what we're seeing in this moment. That's what we're supposed to be seeing, because that's what good editing feels like. Generally, you're not supposed to notice it, but I am going to force you to notice it. Look at it. Look at the editing. So shout out to all of these editors on Dimension 20. Y'all rule. Now, obviously, I am only one person. I don't work on Dimension 20, nor have I met anyone who does. So the picture I painted here may not be entirely accurate. I'm filtering all of this through my perspective, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. I hope it's close, but there are definitely people and jobs that I missed that are just as vital to the show as everyone I talked about here. So leave the names and roles of anyone you think I missed in the comments. Dimension 20 and Dropout in general is something that's genuinely really special to me. And to learn through all of the behind the scenes stuff that it's special to the people that make it too, makes it feel all that much more important to me. A lot of projects are just another job to the crew, and there's nothing wrong with that. You gotta get paid. But to know there's so much passion and love that goes into making this show just makes me happy. The whole atmosphere feels extremely collaborative. Like they all actively listen and hear each other, and all have the same goal in mind, which is perfect because that's what tabletop RPGs are. The cast of D20 are always in sync, so it makes sense that everyone behind the scenes are too. In fact, I don't think the cast could perform as well as they do without all of the work that goes into setting them up for it, because the crew is always there, making them shine.
Brennan, I want to say that everybody here is always with you. We're just not seen on camera. We are there with you every step of the way.
Oh, beautiful.